Hey guys, Mutant Cowboy here. In this video I'm going to be talking about Empathic Resolve, Overwatch, and the Future Initiative buff. I'm also going to be talking very briefly about the shield and some ways to use it that kind of came up during a mission that I was in. But first up, I'm going to be talking about Future Initiative itself. Now this came up in my last video, and thank you Icehawk for actually pointing this out. But what he said was that the buff is based on 100% intact armor, of course, obviously we know that, but it needs permanent healing from you, and I was kind of confused by this. I'm like, what do you mean it needs permanent healing from me? I don't need to heal them. And up until this testing, I'm just like, you know what? What is he talking about? Permanent healing from me? Why would he need healing from me if I'm at full armor? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Thankfully, I got Bear Byers from the Bear Essentials. Some of you may know him. Basically, he's another YouTube content creator, but he does the top 13 every week. Basically, he just sees who's doing good stuff in the space. So we went into the range, and he took a shot, obviously, at the target. You can see here 156 was his damage, and I figured, you know what, all right, I'm going to drop some of my armor. He's no longer going to get that buff, and you know what, he still has the buff. At this point, I was kind of like, oh, poo, because that basically means I was wrong, and obviously I wasn't really like relying on this exactly, but I thought that was how it was working. I thought that was my understanding, right? That as long as I'm at full armor, then everyone on my team gets the buff. Well, unfortunately, it's basically per person. So basically, each individual buff is dependent on that person having full armor. So what he was pointing out was that if you're not a healer with Future Initiative, then you're not able to reapply this buff to everyone because you can't keep people at full health. Alright, so moving on really quickly, this is just a DPS build that I use. It's pretty basic, pretty standard, right? Got focus, got vigilance, got an AKM that I love. But I was in a legendary mission the other day, and I had one of those people who just, couldn't keep their mouth closed, wanted to, express their opinion every time about everything. And yes, obviously the normal thing to do is to just mute people like this when, they're obviously wrong. But for the sake of the mission, you don't want to mute somebody who's actually talking and maybe can provide helpful information at certain points. So I didn't mute him. But basically I had to listen to him constantly talk about this every single minute, like 4 or 5 times every encounter that we did in this mission. And there's plenty of encounters. So I had to hear him mention this like 30 or 40 times during the legendary mission. Obviously you can see I'm running a shield. And what I'm doing with that shield is I'm hiding behind cover with it. And I'm basically using it to peek out and shoot the enemy. Every time I did this, he would constantly say, I've never seen a shield build hide behind cover. I've never seen a shield build hide in the back. Why isn't the shield build going in front and tanking the enemy? Look, I understand that some people don't understand things. But if you are over Shade 1000, I expect that you have a basic understanding of the game. This gentleman, unfortunately, did not. I can understand that maybe some other people don't, so I just want to basically just bring this up. As you can see, my natural point of aim is hitting the pillar in front of me. But as I scope in, my aim is offset to the right. And this is basically true for almost every shield, except on this one, obviously, it's a little bit more obvious. Now, what that means for you is that you can hide behind cover a lot more proficiently than you could without the shield. So you can basically get to a spot where if you can, and you can keep moving around the cover, obviously, and track an enemy, you can shoot them without them really being able to engage you back. And this is the reason I was doing that. So if you see somebody doing this, don't open your mouth like an arrogant idiot and try to, talk shit about them in the mission. Alright, so now moving into talents for healers, and this is mostly focused on the chest. Obviously we know we have Empathic Resolve, which seems to be the mandatory one that is requested by everyone. You have to use Empathic Resolve. And the description on this one is that when you repair an ally, you increase total weapon and skill damage by 3 to 15% for 20 seconds, 1 to 7% on yourself. This effectiveness is increased by your skill tier. So basically, whenever you heal an ally and you're at skill tier 6, you're going to give them a 15% buff. And if you heal yourself, you're going to give yourself a 7% buff. And the other common one that is used is Overwatch, which basically, after staying in cover for 10 seconds, increases you and your allies' total weapon and skill damage by 12% as long as you remain in cover or in a cover-to-cover move. So pretty much, it is always on as long as you are in cover. Now, that compares to the Future Initiative buff on the chest, which if you didn't know, the Future Initiative chest buff is not 25%. It's 10%. Okay? I'm going to explain this. The base buff for 4 pieces gives you 15%. So if you have all the pieces without the chest, you're going to get 15%. If you add the chest, you're going to add an additional 10%, meaning that this chest piece is the weakest of the three. That does not mean it's useless, but it is the weakest. Now, to be fair, all three talents have their own strengths and weaknesses. Like we talked about with Future Initiative, obviously everyone on your team individually needs to have full armor to get the buff. But they can move around, they can do whatever, and they always have the buff as long as they're healed. Empathic Resolve has its own issues. Now, obviously, yes, you get it just for healing an ally, but it only lasts 20 seconds. So it means you constantly need to heal an ally for them to get the buff. If you're not healing them, so let's say they're a sniper and they're in a position that's not necessarily right next to you, or they're not taking damage constantly, then you're not able to heal them to give them this buff. So Empathic Resolve is not always the best. If you have good players on your team who do not take damage, or if you have a shield build who is obviously has a shield that can take the damage for him, so people may not always get this buff if, let's say you put a hive in the back and you expect people to go to it. And there are some basic considerations to make whether or not you're going to choose Empathic Resolve or one of the other two. Overwatch, in my opinion, is probably the easiest one. It is probably one of the best ones, and that is just because you don't really have to do anything. You don't have to jump through hoops. If you are a healer, or even if you're just a regular damage build, and you're throwing out a turret and using a drone, then you can just sit in cover, and you can pop out of cover, do some shooting, duck back into cover, and never lose this buff. And it doesn't matter if your team is in cover, if your team's doing whatever, if your team's at full health or at full armor, they will always have the buff. And for a buff that's pretty much always going to be on versus a buff that has 3% more damage, well, that's obviously a trade-off. Yes, and it's really up to you whether you want to choose it. There is no right or wrong answer here, because like I said, if you don't heal someone, they don't take damage, they don't have Empathic Resolve. If they lose a tiny bit of armor and you can't heal them right away, they are losing a bunch of damage. Now, of course, with Overwatch, if you get knocked out of cover by an explosion, or you have to run out of cover or dive or something, then of course, yes, you lose the buff and you have to wait 10 seconds from the point of getting back into cover to actually reactivate the buff. And yes, that can be an issue for some people. But with that being said, let's actually look at a 3-build setup that I have here. And this is just for, mostly for demonstration purposes, but it's pretty much an accurate representation of what kind of builds you'd actually want to have to use these 3. And of course, obviously you can have 4 people, but that 4th person could either be just, the generic perfect glass cannon type build. He could be a skill build, doesn't matter. He could be a tank build. He could be just a DPS build or a sniper. It doesn't really matter. He could be whatever. It's just these 3 are pretty much the most important kind of generic setups that you would want. So the first build here is very similar to my 4-piece Future Initiative skill damage build. Basically a skill damage 4-piece with BTS U-gloves and a Wyvernware mask. And then, of course, everything rolled in as much skill damage and, skill haste as possible. That's pretty much what you want. The reason for this is because you're going to be doing the damage. You are not going to be the healer. Yes, we talked about, well, they need to be at full health. But here's the issue. If you're the healer and you're running the Empathic Resolve, you can't run the Future Initiative chest piece, which means unless somebody else is running another Future Initiative healing buff, which kind of is a waste, you're not going to get the 4-piece bonus with the chest piece. So the optimal way to run this is actually to have a Future Initiative damage build so that you can get the Future Initiative damage buff on the chest piece. I'm using the BTS U-gloves and I'm using the Artificer Hive on this build. Artificer Hive is another 70% buff to everyone's skills, and if you are using a lot of turrets and a lot of drones in Legendary, which is very common, this is a very good build. Now we're going to follow that up with the healer build. Alright, so the healer build is the one who's going to be running Empathic Resolve because it doesn't detract from the actual 4-piece of the Future Initiative. Now, yes, Future Initiative does have healing stats, but that doesn't make it the best healing build. You can get plenty of healing on a regular build, and your healing hive is just as good, if not better, than a 4-piece Future Initiative. Now, this allows you to actually be the healer to heal everyone for that other player's Future Initiative buff, while also being the only one using Empathic Resolve and not having to double dip on different healing talents. And then, of course, the third build would be, pretty much the classic Hanayu, Wyvernware, whatever you want, skill damage build. Except you are going to be the one using Overwatch. And you may think, well, what the heck? Why would you have Sawyer's knee pads on? Well, that's pretty simple because Sawyer's knee pads keep you in cover when you get hit by an explosion, so they prevent that stagger. So not only do you need an armor roll anyway for a tactician build, because you're already at skill tier 6 with 5 rolls, so having an armor roll just makes sense. This can guarantee that when you are hit by a mortar, not only do you survive, but you don't get staggered or removed out of cover, meaning that everyone on your team will keep that buff in the raid. Yes, fantastic, right? So if you have one person using this, and this can work for a healer build as well, but then now you have everybody giving their rolls, doing the best that they can with those builds, and combining all of these talents. So you get the 4-piece future initiative with the chest boost, you get empathic resolve without the interference from another future initiative healer, and you get Overwatch without the risk of an explosion driving you out of cover, and you have enough health so that even if you do get hit by an explosion, you're not going to die. So basically, it is a win-win-win, and it is the proper use of all 3 talents. As for which talent is the best, if anyone says you have to run this is the best one, well, they're probably wrong and they don't know what they're talking about because they don't actually know what they're doing. I'm not saying that Overwatch is better than Empathic Resolve. I'm not saying that Future Initiative is better than Empathic Resolve. None of them are really better than the other ones. They just require different things and different timing. You should not be on a raid team, for example, with 2 people running Empathic Resolve. You should not be on a raid team, for example, with 2 people running Overwatch, because you're not getting those buffs appropriately. If anything, it should be 1 Overwatch and 1 Future Initiative buff. The reason for this, because, well, Empathic Resolve is only going to help 1/2 of that team. So if you're divided up, then Empathic Resolve isn't going to help. If you're all together, then Empathic Resolve will be beneficial. But Overwatch and the 4-piece Future Initiative buff applies all the time to everyone, regardless of where they're positioning at. So if you have teams that are divided, then obviously you want the ones that don't require you to be healed by a specific person. So Empathic Resolve, yeah, I don't suggest it for every single build. But if you are using a 4-piece Future Initiative with an Empathic Resolve chest piece on a 4-man heroic, then yes, it might be the best choice. Especially if your team is constantly moving and constantly running around the battlefield, then yeah, it might be better. But again, Overwatch is just as good if you can run cover to cover. If you understand how to use it, then it is not a bad thing to have. Just because Empathic Resolve can give you 3% more for 20 seconds does not mean it is better. The amount of time that you could spend without it might detract from the actual overall damage that you are doing. So that is something to consider. So pretty much, if you are the healer, if you are the one running this, it is up to you. It's not up to them, because you know how you play and you know how you give the buff. But either way, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.